to the Occult London podcast. This is a new podcast dedicated to exploring magic, mysticism, the Qabalah, as well as many other topics of interest. This is the 6th episode of a series exploring different concepts in relation to the Kabbalistic tree of life. I'm your host Will, and I will be guiding you on this journey through the dark Stygian blackness towards the light. I'm not an expert, but rather a student like you, and this is a project really for me to just learn and share our ideas together. If you like the podcast, please make sure to visit our website at www.occultlondon.co.uk, where you can also subscribe to the show. So let's get started. So the topic of today's podcast is the invisible Sephirah, which is known as DAATH or knowledge. And this is the Sephirah, which is just literally below the supernal triad, really, and very much relates to this sort of hidden knowledge. The astrological correspondence for this particular sphere is Sirius, the dog star. The tarot correspondences are the trumps as a whole. The elemental correspondences is our air. The magical image is a head with two faces, so a female one looking upwards and to the left, and then there's a male one also looking downwards and to the right, and both are framed. There's also various other symbols associated with this mysterious Sephirah, such as the empty room and the absence of all symbolism. So this is really this very mysterious place. In terms of the different colours for the four worlds, we have in Absolute we have lavender. Bria, we have pale silver grey, Yetzirah, it's pure violet, and Asaya is grey flecked with gold. The correspondence in the microcosm is the conjunction of the Ruach and the Neshama. And in terms of the body, this would correspond with the neck. So those are the main correspondences for this particular Sephirah. We'll also be talking about some other things now. Before I do that, I wanted to kind of read a passage which I think is quite relevant to this particular sphere from the excellent Alan Moore graphic novel known as Promethea, when he says the following: We are not in non-existence, neither are we in that existence which is God, neither that which is not God. This is the Tower of the Adepts, the Black Brothers, and it is DAATH. No light is permitted here. DAATH, in the great beginning, was a true Sephirah, as true as any. Paths led to and from it, both the beggar and the fountain. Then the tree was of a whole. God was not separated from God's universe. Now came the fall, now came the cataclysm, the lightning energies of God descending, overwhelming the structure of existence. Its lower spheres were broken from the three divine supernals where DAATH had been, was now a dreadful absence, was a marvellous crack in everything. The three heads of God were sundered from existence. Who shall say that this was accident? And likewise, who shall say that accidents be not arabesque within some wider figure? Of this nothing is known. Like its shattered planet or its unseen colour, DAATH is that knowledge, knowable only by its absence. It is the neither. It is that knowledge here pursued by the Black Brothers in the Tower of the Adepts. No light here is permitted. Fare you well, sisters. So I think that's particularly beautiful paragraph which talks very much about this mysterious emptiness and the idea of DAATH being the entrance into the abyss. So it's where things are lost. So let's just move on to some of the basics of the sphere. So as I said before, it lies between Tiphereth and Keter on the pillar of consciousness, and it's just below the supernal triad's its position. The name for DAATH in Hebrew is knowledge. And this is also very representative of special knowledge. So it's a kind of unique knowledge related to consciousness rather than the intellect. It's not ideas, it's not concepts or theories, but rather a conscious knowledge related to the soul and what it needs. And Yeah, really, it's to do with the sort of a union of masculine and feminine principles, resulting in this birth of this fourth Sephirah, which is known as knowledge. So it's here where traditionally the Garden of Eden was situated before the fall. If we look at the Proverbs, this is quite well illustrated in this particular quote, which is Proverbs 3.13. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is every one that retaineth her. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he founded the heavens. By his knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down the dew. And also Proverbs 24:3. Through wisdom is a house builded, and by understanding is it established. And by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all pleasant and precious riches. So this second verse that we just read, you can obviously see the idea of wisdom being chokhmah, bina being understanding, and then obviously knowledge, which is the da'at, is that child of those two Sephirahs. In terms of talking about the descriptions of da'at, I mean, it's a very difficult Sephirah to understand from a kind of human perspective, as it is above Tiferet. As we can see from some of the symbolism, there's things like the empty room or the neither. If we were going to use the analogy of Alan Moore, he talks about an empty room. What is the empty room or the neither? So, the empty room is obviously devoid of all things. It's like a vacuum, an empty space, but in a sense, nothing is really ever empty, for everything is part of everything else. So this is one of the big kind of paradoxes of the occult and mysticism. And so obviously here the paradox applies in da'at. So it's kind of, here is where the great nothingness, the pregnant void that the first actual forms are precipitated from, the introductions of the supernal triad. And as we've seen from our research previously, Binah is the queen and the mother of forms, Chokhmah is the father of force, and then obviously the power flows from Chokhmah to Binah and via da'at, which is one of the invisible paths towards Chesed, which we will be talking about next week. And so Chesed is the Sephirah of forms, so we can say that obviously da'at is the kind of facilitator and mediator of that formative energy of Binah. So you could say in that sense it's very much a higher version of Yesod, which is one we will be talking about in a future episode, in the way that it kind of organises and powers the creations of form further down the tree. And there's also kind of a very deep magical connection and a circuit between da'at and Yesod. So da'at is also a lower version of Keter, where form is created rather than force. However, it's also must be remembered that the forms we're talking about are not physical forms until further down the tree. This is particularly well described in the following quote. Da'at, the supernal forces are brought down across the abyss to manifest in form as abstract knowledge. Thus, the knowledge referred to in the title, as with the titles of the supernal Sephiroth, means far more than the ordinary human mentation, abstract knowledge being almost synonymous with faith. But faith emanates ultimately from Binah, and could well be called unmanifest knowledge. In da'at, it is the transition of the logoidal plan, from a state of unmanifestation to a state of abstraction, so far as the human mentation is concerned. Traditionally, it's been considered by various writers and authors that da'at is the highest point of awareness that the human soul can reach and still remain human, because traditionally anything above and going into the supernal levels is meant to be only possible to the sort of spirit or the divine spark itself. So there is this idea that when you reach da'at, you cross the abyss, and so you leave everything that was human about you behind. My own personal view on that is it's the jury's out, so we'll have to see when we get to that stage of development, but that is one of the traditional ideas. Gareth Knight talks about this when he said the following quote: da'at is the highest point of awareness of the human soul, regarded as a soul, or in other terminology, higher self, evolutionary self. For awareness of the supernal levels can only be possible to the spirit or divine spark itself. It is the gateway to what is called nirvana in the East, and thus represents the point where a soul has reached the full stature of its evolutionary development, has attained free will, and can make the choice between going on to the further evolution in other spheres or remaining to assist in the planetary hierarchy. Before the grade of Da'at, the experience of the soul is devoted to bringing about a fusion of itself with the spirit to becoming. After the power of death are fully operative in a soul, there is no further progress of becoming for that soul. So what he's talking about here is really this experience of crossing the abyss. Another author, Aleister Crowley, actually wrote about this particular experience as well, which I think is relevant, quoting here, when he said, "It corresponds more or less to the gap in thought between the real, which is ideal, and the unreal, which is actual. In the abyss, all things exist, at least in posse, but are without any possible meaning, for they lack the substratum of spiritual reality. They are appearances without law. They are thus insane delusions. Now, the abyss being thus the great storehouse of phenomena, it is the source of all impressions." So it's interesting that Crowley uses the term storehouse to describe the abyss, as that's obviously very similar to the title of Yesod, which is the treasure house of images. So, we can obviously see from that Da'at is a storehouse of phenomena and impressions, whilst Yesod is the storehouse of images and forms. And again, it shows you that kind of interesting relationship between the two spheres. If we look at the mythology relating to Da'at, it's there's various different gods and goddesses that we can apply to it. One of the good ones is Janus, which gives the kind of good magical image for the Sephirah, for the god who looks both ways. So obviously one is looking down into manifestation and seeing all that occurs therein, and also upwards towards the supernals, so giving the kind of spiritual experience of the vision across the abyss. Other gods that we could attribute to this would be Baldur, the beautiful, Horus as well, and Horus in terms of that sort of idea of the pure spirit descending is pretty good. Another one that I think is quite relevant would be Heimdall, who from the Norse mythology, who guards the Rainbow Bridge, which leads from the world of man to the world of gods. So there's lots of other gods that you can kind of have a look at. As it is quite a mysterious Sephirah, I'd recommend doing some meditation on a certain aspect within a god to really kind of get to the grips of that. If we move to look at the Da'at in terms of position on the body, obviously it corresponds to the throat area, and there's a lots of teachings from the ages in relation to the throat and what you could describe as the voice. So, for instance, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, which is obviously in Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, which is another one from the Bible. From the ancient Egypt, we have, "I, Osiris, brought my own name into my mouth as a word of power, and I forthwith came into being, under the form of things which are, and under the form of Khepera." And that's from the Book of Knowing. From the Hindu traditions, we also have the following. "In a year, he, Prajapati, desired to speak. He uttered Bhahuva Svar." So, and apologies for the pronunciation there. So, obviously, Burs mean earth, and Bhuva, which means sort of figment, and Svar, which became the sky. So, we can have a look at that in terms of he uses his mouth to create the word. And then also, this is the beginning of the ancient word, the potential and source for everything done, which is from the Mayan. So, it's very much about this kind of words of power, this knowledge, this force that is built up in the supernals and then is spilling out downwards. And then obviously, ascending the tree, we obviously get the idea of leaving the ego behind and crossing the abyss. And it's seen as very much kind of a entering a mysterious blackness, a kind of void, and almost like throwing away everything you've got blindly with faith, and then seeing something on the other side, but you have no awareness that things are going to be okay. It's very much a leap into the abyss, into the blackness. So moving on, and obviously the one of the titles of Da'at is knowledge, and knowledge could be things such as facts, information, skills acquired through studying, etc. There's also things such as the transmission of knowledge. Knowledge is something we can acquire through experience and education, but it's not something that we kind of exists on its own, if that makes sense. So we would acquire knowledge after a kind of long and often arduous struggle. However, we never really have kind of an awareness of it really until we have actually arrived at the destination. And you often don't realise you have knowledge until you're kind of looking back retrospectively. So it is very much a sort of invisible thing from that point of view. It's only when you're kind of at a place of knowledge that you have it, and it's not something that you can kind of see before you reach it, if that makes sense. So this is one of the other kind of paradoxes about this particular Sephirah, and how that kind of title came about. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of main aspects of the Sephirah of DAATH that I wanted to kind of talk about this week. There's lots of other things that would potentially be relevant to this particular Sephirah. However, those are sort of the main ones that I thought it would be worth discussing. Hope everybody's enjoyed this particular episode. If anyone's got any comments or questions, then please feel free to get in touch. And I hope you join us on the next episode. Thanks very much.